Hello, my friends. Before we get into it, please hit the subscribe button and drop a like. I'd appreciate it a lot as it contributes to the growth of this channel. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments also. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, relax, and let the story unfold through me. The morning was cool, the scent of damp earth thick in the air as I stepped out of the ranger station. The sun had barely crested the tree line, spilling golden light across the dense stretch of wilderness before me. The usual sounds of the forest birds chirping, the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth should have been comforting. But there was something about the air today, something that made me pause before closing the door behind me. Dispatch had called early, before I'd even poured my first cup of coffee. A new hiking trail had been reported near Pine Hollow, a stretch of land far enough into the park that it rarely saw visitors outside of hunting season. No one had reported its construction, and there were no permits issued for trail work in that area. But now, according to a camper who had stumbled across it just before dawn, a perfectly carved path had appeared overnight, stretching deep into the forest. That alone would have been strange. Trails take time to form, whether through foot traffic or human intervention. They don't just appear. I secured my pack and started toward the truck, gravel crunching beneath my boots. The drive out to Pine Hollow was a long one, winding through thick trees that had been standing longer than any map had been drawn. The further I drove, the narrower the dirt road became, until it felt like I was pushing through the wilderness itself. The camper who had called in the report wasn't there when I arrived. I didn't blame them. If I'd found an unfamiliar path deep in the woods, I wouldn't have lingered either. I parked the truck and stepped out, stretching my legs before scanning the tree line. The air was still, heavy in a way that felt unnatural. The trees here were older, their trunks thick and gnarled with age. The forest had a way of feeling untouched, even in the areas that saw regular foot traffic. But something about this place made my skin itch. I walked forward, brushing a hand over my radio, more for reassurance than anything else. The entrance to the new trail was just ahead, cutting through the undergrowth with unnatural precision. The dirt was packed down tight, as if hundreds of hikers had already passed through. But there were no footprints, no signs of movement, just the trail. I stepped forward, my boots sinking slightly into the earth. The path stretched ahead, curving gently into the trees, disappearing deeper into the forest. I exhaled slowly. I had been a ranger for years. I had seen abandoned hunting cabins, found old trails that had long since been swallowed by the woods, even dealt with campers who had lost their way and ended up in places they shouldn't have been. But this was something else. I reached for my radio. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. I've located the trail. No signage, no markers. Looks well traveled, but no visible footprints. Proceeding in on foot. A burst of static crackled through the speaker before dispatch responded. Poppy 402. Check in every 30 minutes. I adjusted the strap of my pack and took my first real step onto the path. The air changed immediately. It was subtle at first, the way the wind stopped, the way the sound of the forest seemed to mute. I continued forward, moving slow, my boots pressing into the dirt. The trees on either side of the trail grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out more and more of the light filtering through the canopy. I checked my watch. 9:12 a.m. I would follow the trail for a mile, maybe 2, see where it led. If it stretched further, I'd turn back, mark the location, and send a team out later. But the longer I walked, the deeper the sense of unease grew. The trees were too uniform. The trail was too smooth. No rocks. No fallen branches. No debris. It felt placed, like it wasn't supposed to be here. Then, up ahead, something on the ground. I slowed, scanning the path as I moved forward. A boot, not discarded, not tossed aside, placed neatly, like someone had taken it off and set it down with care. I knelt beside it, my fingers hovering over the laces. The material was worn, weathered from use, but the inside was clean. No dirt, no signs that it had ever been walked in. A few feet ahead, a second boot, placed the same way, side by side. I stood, my pulse slow but heavy. The trail continued beyond the boots, winding deeper into the trees. And there, another object, a backpack, zipped shut, the straps tucked neatly beneath it, the fabric unstained, untouched by the elements. I exhaled through my nose, forcing my breathing to stay steady. Something wasn't right. I reached for my radio, pressing the call button. Dispatch. I found personal belongings on the trail. One pair of boots, one backpack. No footprints, no sign of a struggle. Continuing forward. Silence. Then, static. Not normal static. Something beneath it. A sound, like breathing. My thumb hovered over the button, waiting for a response. Dispatch? More static. Then, a single word. Faint, distorted. Turn around. I sucked in a slow breath, my grip tightening on the radio. The voice had been low, almost distant, but it hadn't come from dispatch. It had come from inside the static. I turned sharply, scanning the trail behind me. The forest was silent. Nothing moved. I exhaled through my nose. The mind plays tricks in the woods. It's easy to let paranoia set in, to mistake natural sounds for something else. I pressed the call button again. Copy, dispatch. Trail interference is heavy. Checking back in soon. I released the button. The static was gone. The radio was silent. I turned back toward the trail, my pulse steady, but my skin crawling. The path stretched further into the trees, winding deeper, the dirt too perfect, too untouched. I stepped past the boots, past the backpack, and then I saw it, another set of belongings. The jacket, folded neatly in the center of the path. The breath in my lungs turned to ice. I knew that jacket, the fabric, the patch on the sleeve, the frayed stitching near the collar. It was mine, set down carefully in the dirt, as if I had taken it off and left it behind. I turned. The path behind me had changed. The boots were gone. The backpack gone. My own footprints gone. And the trees, once still shifted, like something was waiting. The path behind me was gone. No footprints. No disturbed dirt. Just an unbroken trail, stretching in both directions, as if I had never walked it at all. I turned back to where my jacket lay. It was still there, folded too neatly in the center of the path. I hadn't removed it. I hadn't been here before. And yet, it was mine. I took a slow, measured breath, my fingers twitching slightly at my sides. The air was heavy, thick with something unseen. Something was watching. I knew it, deep in my bones. The forest was too still. The wind had stopped. The distant sounds of birds and rustling leaves had vanished. I reached for my radio, pressing the call button. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. Do you copy? Silence. Then, static, faint, distant. Not the usual interference. not the quick bursts of noise that came when a signal was weak. This static breathed, a slow inhale, a slow exhale. My skin crawled. I gritted my teeth and pressed the button again. I'm requesting immediate verification on my last check-in. Do you read? The static stretched. Then a voice, faint, distant. You were here before. My stomach turned. I took a slow step away from the radio, my breath uneven. That hadn't been dispatch. That hadn't even been a response. That had been a statement. I turned back toward the trail, my boots pressing into the dirt. I needed to stay focused. Panic wasn't going to help. I wasn't lost. I had my bearings. I just needed to turn around, retrace my steps, get back to the truck, and leave. I took a slow step forward, then another. Each footfall felt wrong, like I was stepping onto something that wasn't really there. The dirt was too firm, the trail too perfect. I reached the spot where I had first seen the boots and the backpack. They were still gone. I swallowed hard. I knew I had walked past them. I knew they had been there, but the ground showed no sign of them ever existing. The radio on my vest clicked. I jerked, my heart pounding, my hand flying to the speaker. It had turned on by itself. Static buzzed through the speaker. Then a whisper, not a voice, something closer, like someone was standing right behind me. Keep going. I spun. The trail behind me had changed again. It no longer led back the way I had come. The dirt stretched into the distance, perfectly straight, unbroken, like I had never walked it at all. A deep, twisting horror settled into my chest. I pressed the call button on my radio again, harder this time. Dispatch, do you copy? A long pause. Then, we haven't received any calls tonight. My breath caught in my throat. The words had come too fast, too identical to my last check-in. I exhaled through my nose, trying to ignore the ice-cold dread curling through my veins. I had two choices: go back or keep moving. But looking at the path behind me, I realized I had no way back. So I turned toward the unknown, and I kept walking. The air was heavy, pressing against me with an unnatural stillness. I walked forward, my boots crunching against the packed dirt of the trail, but it didn't feel like I was moving. Each step should have taken me farther into the forest, but the landscape didn't change. The trees stood frozen, their branches interwoven above me, casting shadows that seemed too dark for the midday sun. I glanced at my watch. 9:37 a.m. I had been walking for over 20 minutes. The truck should have been visible behind me, or at the very least, the clearing where I'd started. But the trail stretched on, straight and unbroken. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, but underneath it was something faintly metallic, like rusted iron. I kept moving, my hand brushing over the radio clipped to my vest. I debated calling dispatch again, but the last time I hadn't received a real answer. The words that had come through had been wrong. We haven't received any calls tonight. It wasn't just that the response had been delayed or Garbleday had sounded identical to my earlier check-in. Same pacing, same inflection, like a recording of my own call played back to me. I forced my breathing to steady. My job was to investigate. That was all. If I couldn't find an explanation, I would turn around and log my report, have a team survey the area later. I just had to keep moving. Up ahead, the trail shifted. At first, I thought it was an illusionary uneven stretch of earth causing the path to warp in my vision. But as I moved closer, I saw it for what it was. A fork in the trail, Two paths, identical in width and shape, splitting off in separate directions. But I had walked straight this entire time. There had been no turns, no intersections. Yet here it was an unnatural divide, two identical trails stretching in opposite directions, vanishing into the tree line. A slow, creeping unease crawled up my spine. I turned, looking behind me. The path was still there straight, undisturbed, but the forest around it seemed denser than before. The trees that lined the trail were packed tighter now, their trunks stretching high, disappearing into the canopy. I swallowed hard. The left path curved slightly, disappearing behind a thick wall of evergreens. The right continued in a near straight line, but the farther it stretched, the darker the trees became, their bark blackened as if touched by fire. I took a slow step forward, scanning the ground, and then something new, an object resting at the mouth of the right path. I moved closer, my pulse quickening. A notebook. Its cover was battered, the edges frayed from exposure. The pages were yellowed, but still intact. I knelt, hesitating only for a second before picking it up. The cover was blank, no name, no identifying marks. I flipped it open, scanning the first few pages. Handwritten notes. The ink was faded, but I could still make out the words. Day 1. The trail wasn't here yesterday. I know these woods. I know every turn, every ridge. But this path, wasn't here before. I turned the page. Day 2. I followed it for miles. There's no end. I don't know how to explain it. I thought I had been walking in a straight line, but when I turned back, the entrance was gone. I don't know how far I've gone. I don't know if I can leave. A deep, unsettled feeling coiled in my stomach. I flipped further ahead. The handwriting had changed. The earlier entries were careful, precise. These were frantic. The lines jagged, the words barely legible. Day 5. I found something today, my own footprints. But they weren't behind me. They were ahead, like I had already been here. The next page was smudged, the ink blurred as if it had been exposed to water. I flipped again the final entry. Only 2 words. It's waiting. My breath came slower now. I stood, gripping the notebook tightly, my fingers pressing into the worn pages. The right path. The one where the notebook had been left. Had the author gone that way? Had they ever come back? I turned toward the left trail, considering my options. It wasn't marked. It didn't look any different. But I had a gut feeling that I hadn't seen the last of the right path. Something had been waiting at the end of it, and I wasn't ready to find out what. I stuffed the notebook into my pack and took my first step onto the left path. The moment my foot touched the dirt, the wind shifted. A low, groaning sound echoed through the trees, like the creak of something old, something moving. I stopped, heart pounding. Then, from the radio, a burst of static. I swallowed hard and pressed the call button. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. I need immediate confirmation on my location. Something is. The static cut out. A voice came through. Low, familiar, my own voice. You took the wrong path. The blood in my veins went ice cold. I whipped around. The right path was gone. Only a wall of trees remained, thick and impenetrable. I turned back to the left path, my breath shallow. The way forward stretched on, empty, waiting, and then the sound of footsteps. Not mine. Somewhere deep in the woods ahead of me, something was moving. and it was getting closer. The sound of footsteps echoed through the forest, soft but deliberate, not hurried, not panicked, pacing. I stood completely still, listening, my breath locked in my chest. The trees ahead were thick, their trunks stretching into a sky I could barely see through the canopy. The air was heavier now, thick with damp earth and something I couldn't name. I checked my watch. 9:53 a.m. The numbers felt meaningless. Time felt meaningless. I gripped the notebook in my pack, the final words still burning in my mind. It's waiting. But what was waiting? I took a slow step forward, my boots pressing into the dirt, feeling for any uneven ground. The path was still too perfect. No overgrown brush, no roots breaking the surface, just smooth, packed earth stretching into the trees. The footsteps had stopped. I scanned the forest ahead, my hand brushing against my radio again. I hesitated. The last time I had tried to call in, I hadn't heard dispatch. I had heard my own voice. You took the wrong path. I inhaled deeply through my nose, forcing my pulse to steady. I wasn't lost. Not yet. I had taken the left path. The right had vanished, but I could still track my way back if I needed to. I moved forward, following the gentle curve of the trail. Then, something new. Objects. More. The longing. The first was a hat, set neatly on the ground. The brim curved like someone had carefully placed it there. The second, a water bottle half full, the condensation still fresh, resting perfectly upright on the trail. I swallowed hard. These weren't discarded. These were left. I crouched, inspecting the bottle. The label was worn, the plastic slightly dented, but when I touched it, it was cold. Recently left. Minutes ago. My eyes darted to the trees, scanning the shadows between the trunks. Someone had been here. Maybe they still were. I straightened slowly, my body tensed. I moved past the bottle, continuing down the trail, my hand hovering over the radio again. I needed to keep going. Then another object, a backpack. Unlike the others, this one was open. I approached carefully, my breath coming slower. The zippers were parted, the inside exposed. I knelt down and reached inside, a map, unfolded, spread across the dirt. The ink was slightly smudged, but I could make out the outline of the park, the usual hiking trails marked in red. I scanned it quickly, looking for anything unusual. There, a new trail, not a marked one, not one I recognized. It was drawn in pencil, faint, like someone had sketched it in after the fact. I traced the line with my finger, following its curve. It matched the path I was on. My stomach tightened. Who had drawn this? I turned the map over. A note, scrawled on the back in sharp, hurried handwriting. It doesn't end. A slow, creeping dread settled into my bones. I exhaled through my nose, my fingers tightening on the map. I looked around again, scanning the trees. Still nothing. No wind. No rustling leaves. Just that unnatural silence. Then a rustling, not behind me. Ahead, my body went rigid. The trail curved slightly, disappearing into thicker woods. The sound had come from there. I took a step forward, my boots careful against the dirt. The air shifted, the silence stretched thin, like something unseen was pulling the sound out of the forest, suffocating it. I rounded the bend and froze. The trail ended abruptly. not in an overgrown mess, not in a clearing. It just stopped. The dirt path so smooth, so perfectly formed, ended in a wall of trees. No more path. No way forward. I stared, my mind struggling to process it. I had been walking for miles. The trail had stretched on and on, deeper into the forest. It couldn't just stop. I turned around, the path behind me gone. My pulse spiked. The dirt path that had led me here was no longer there. The woods had closed in. Only trees remained. Thick, towering pines, stretching high into the sky, their trunks so close together they formed a barrier. Like the forest had swallowed the path whole. My breath came sharp and uneven. I took a step backward. Then footsteps. Not mine. Close. Coming from behind the trees. My skin went ice cold. I turned slowly, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. The footsteps stopped. I scanned the dense forest. Nothing, but I could feel it. Something was there. Something waiting. A crackle from my radio. A whisper. Not static. A voice. Low. Faint. Right behind me. Keep going. The air collapsed inward. The forest was pressing against me now. The trees stretching, twisting, warping. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if there was anywhere to go, but I ran. The trees blurred past me, my boots crunching against the forest floor. I turned left, then right, then left again. Then I saw it. A clearing at the head. The only open space in the sea of trees. I sprinted toward it, my breath coming ragged, my legs burning. And as I broke through the tree line, I stopped dead. The clearing wasn't empty. Something was there, something waiting, and it looked exactly like me. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, my breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The thing standing in the middle of the clearing, it was me. Same uniform, same boots, same face. But something was wrong. It stood too still, its arms hanging at its sides, its head tilted slightly watching. I felt my stomach twist violently, my skin cold despite the heat in my body. This wasn't a trick of the light, wasn't a mirage or exhaustion messing with my head. It was real. I took a step back, my boot pressing into the damp earth. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there, like it had been waiting for me. I forced a slow inhale through my nose, my fingers twitching toward the radio clipped to my vest. I pressed the call button. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. I need immediate assistance at... Static. Then a voice. My voice. We haven't received any calls tonight. The exact same inflection. The same pause between words. A perfect copy. My skin crawled. I took another step back. The thing in the clearing still hadn't moved. It was me. But it wasn't. The wind didn't stir around it. The shadows didn't touch it the way they should have. Like it wasn't part of this place. Like it didn't belong. I clenched my jaw, forcing my body to stay still. If I ran, would it follow? If I spoke, would it speak back? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Then, finally, it moved. Not much, just its head tilting slightly to the side, like it was studying me, the way I might study something unfamiliar, something wrong. My fingers tightened around the radio. I had to get out of here. I turned, ready to bolt back into the trees, but the path was gone. My chest locked. I had just come from there. I had run through that opening in the trees. But now, the clearing was completely surrounded. Thick trunks, stretching impossibly high, their bark dark and unbroken, like no one had ever passed through. I whipped back toward the figure. It was closer. It had moved. I hadn't seen it step forward. I hadn't seen it shift, but now it was only a few feet away, too close. My breath hitched. The radio crackled again. "You were here before." The voice sent an instant pulse of nausea through me. It wasn't coming from the radial anymore. It was coming from the thing standing in front of me. I stumbled back, my pulse spiking, my hands clenched at my sides, my boots slipping against the soft earth. The thing took another step. The radio crackled once more. "Keep going." The same words I had heard before, but this time I knew what it meant. I had no choice. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I turned and plunged into the trees, even though there was no path. Even though the forest had closed around me, I ran anyway. The branches ripped at my arms, my legs, my face. My boots slammed against uneven ground, kicking up leaves, disturbing the stillness. But the thing in the clearing, it didn't chase me. It didn't have to. Because no matter how far I ran, how many turns I took, how deep into the forest I pushed, I always ended up back at the clearing. And every time I did, the thing standing in the middle of it was closer. I was trapped. No matter how far I ran, no matter which direction I took through the forest, I always came back to the clearing. And every time, the thing wearing my face was closer. The air felt heavier now, thick with damp earth and something sour beneath it. The trees loomed high above me, their trunks packed so tightly together it was as if the forest had shifted as if it had intentionally closed off every escape. My breath was ragged, my hands trembling at my sides. The realization was sinking in, slow and suffocate. I was not alone. I had never been alone. The figure in the clearing had moved again, only a few feet away now, close enough that I could see the details of its uniform, my uniform, the dirt stains on the fabric, the slight fray at the shoulder seam, the same as mine. But it wasn't just my uniform. It was me. Same stance, same boots, same expression. But something was off. Its mouth, it was too wide, like it was trying to smile but didn't know how. I took a step back, my boots sinking slightly into the earth. The thing didn't follow, didn't react, but it was waiting. The radio at my side crackled again, a whisper, my own voice. "You were here before." I clenched my teeth, gripping the radio with stiff fingers. "Who is this?" Silence. Then, "Keep going." I exhaled sharply through my nose, my pulse hammering. My eyes flicked around the clearing, searching for anything that had changed. And then I saw it, something new. At the far end of the clearing, just beyond the thing wearing my face a path. It hadn't been there before. But now, between the trees, a narrow trail stretched into the distance, twisting out of sight. I swallowed hard. Was this another trick? Another trap? The thing in the clearing shifted again. Its head tilted just slightly, watching, waiting. I had no other choice. I forced my legs to move, stepping carefully toward the path. I kept my eyes on the figure the entire time, my breath slow and controlled. It didn't move. It let me leave. I passed the threshold into the new path, and the air shifted. The forest swallowed the clearing behind me. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. And deep in the trees ahead, something whispered my name. The whisper of my name drifted through the trees, curling in the air like smoke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even threatening. But it knew me, and that was worse. I kept walking, my boots pressing into the perfectly packed dirt of the new path. The air was thicker here, the light barely filtering through the branches above. The trees leaned in close, their trunks twisted in unnatural ways. I couldn't tell if it was my mind playing tricks on me, or if they had always been like this. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to focus. The radio at my side was quiet now. No static, no distorted messages, just silence. The path wound deeper, stretching endlessly ahead of me. There was no sign of an exit, no markers, no landmark, just more trail. And then something new, a small object on the path ahead. I slowed my steps, scanning the trees before approaching. The air here was damp, carrying the scent of old leaves and stagnant water. I stopped when I saw what it was, a compass, neatly placed in the dirt. I crouched down, fingers hovering over it, before finally picking it up. The casing was scratched, the glass smudged, but the needle was spinning, fast, uncontrolled, no direction. I turned it in my hands, tilting it, watching as the arrow never settled. The realization hit me like ice in my veins. There was no north here, no sense of direction, no way out. A shudder passed through me, and I quickly stuffed the compass into my pocket. I needed to keep moving. I stood and took another step forward, crunch. Not from me, behind me. I turned sharply, heart hammering. The path behind me was empty, but the trees, they were closer. I swallowed hard. I wasn't imagining it. The space where I had just walked it was smaller now. The trees had closed in, their trunks pressed together, as if the forest itself was shifting, pushing forward. I moved faster. The air thinned as I walked, but my skin still prickled with the sensation of being watched. Then, another object, up ahead, placed too perfectly in the center of the path. A watch. I hesitated this time. My breath was uneven now, my body locked with tension. I bent down, inspecting it. The second hand wasn't moving. Frozen at 3:17 a.m., I checked my own watch. 3:17 a.m. The breath in my lungs turned to ice. I didn't touch it. I didn't pick it up. I just walked past it, faster now. The trail wound on, stretching forever into the trees. And then, just ahead, something was standing on the path. I stopped so fast my vision blurred. A figure, tall, unmoving, waiting. My stomach twisted. I already knew what I would see. I already knew. It was me, standing in the center of the trail, facing me, its arms at its sides, its expression blank. A slow, creeping horror curled into my ribs. This one was different. The one in the clearing had been watching, testing me. But this one, it was blocking my way. A voice whispered behind me, right against my ear. You were here before. I didn't turn around. I ran. My boots pounded against the packed dirt of the trail, my breath coming in sharp bursts. The trees blurred past me, the path twisting in ways I didn't remember, stretching further than it should have. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not with the memory of that thing standing in the center of the trail still burned into my vision. Me, not just a reflection, not just a copy. Something else, something waiting. The whisper had been too close. The air had shifted around me when I heard it, like something had pressed against my skin, breathing in my fear. I didn't know where I was running to. I only knew I had to get away. The trees bent at unnatural angles as I ran, their branches stretching overhead like fingers lacing together. The ground beneath my boots was firm, but it didn't feel real, like I wasn't running on earth anymore, like I was running on something else. I pressed a hand to my radio as I ran, my fingers shaking as I keyed the mic. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. I need immediate assistance. Ayana, static, not loud, not sharp, soft, breathing. Then my own voice. There's nothing out here. I nearly stumbled. The words had come too perfectly, like a memory. I had forgotten I had spoken, a phrase I had said before. I gritted my teeth and pushed harder, forcing my legs to move faster, my lungs burning as I sprinted forward. Then the trail ended. Abruptly, 1 second, I was running along the never-ending path. The next, I was somewhere else. I stumbled forward, nearly collapsing as the world around me changed. The trees were gone. The sky was gone. I was inside. The walls stretched high, impossibly high, dark wood paneling lining the space like an old hunting cabin. But there were no doors, no windows, just me and the thing standing in the corner. I felt my breath leave my body. It was me, again, but different this time. Its face was wrong. The mouth was too wide. The eyes were too empty, and it was smiling. The radio crackled. A whisper crawled through the static. It's almost time. The lights overhead flickered, and I realized I wasn't alone. There were others, figures standing just beyond the reach of the dim light, watching, waiting, all of them wearing my face. The air collapsed inward. A deep, suffocating weight pressed against me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The lights went out. The darkness pressed against me, suffocating and complete. My breath came in short bursts, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was gone. The walls, the floor, the figures that had surrounded me. Now there was only nothingness. The air smelled damp, thick with something metallic, something that coated the back of my throat like rust. My hands reached out instinctively, fingers searching for anything solid, any anchor to reality. Nothing. I was floating, not weightless, not drifting, but untethered, like the world had been stripped away and replaced with an endless silent void. Then a whisper, soft, crawling through the emptiness. It's almost time. The same words, over and over again. A slow pulse of dread settled deep in my stomach. I tried to move, but my legs felt heavy, locked in place by something unseen. The whisper didn't stop. It surrounded me, folding into itself, multiplying. Then, light. A dim flicker, a small pulse in the distance. Not warm, not welcoming, cold. Like something had opened its eyes. The light grew, stretching outward, pulling the darkness away in jagged, uneven streaks. My vision blurred, the world slowly pulling itself back into focus. And suddenly, I was standing again, back on the trail, The trees loomed around me, tall and impossibly dense. The sky above was an endless grey, muted, without a trace of the sun. My boots pressed into the familiar packed dirt of the path, but my body ached. I checked my watch. 3:17 p.m. The same time as before. The same time as the broken watch I had found. A slow, sinking feeling twisted through me. I pressed my fingers against my chest, grounding myself. I was back, but I wasn't sure when. The trail stretched ahead, winding deeper into the trees. The path behind me, gone, just like before. No way back. A deep, slow breath. Focus. Think. I reached for my radio, my fingers stiff as I pressed the call button. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. I need an immediate response. Silence. Then, static. But this time, something was different. The static wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like breathing. I gritted my teeth. Who is this? A pause. Then, a voice. My own. You were here before. A sharp pulse of fear shot through me. The radio hissed, stretching the static into something long and unnatural. Then, footsteps. Not over the radio. Behind me. Slow, steady, coming closer. I turned sharply, my breath caught in my throat. The trees stood motionless, the forest still. But I felt it, the weight of something unseen, pressing against the air, bending the space around me. I wasn't alone. I took a step forward. The footsteps behind me matched. I stopped. They stopped. A cold sweat broke across my skin. I took another step. Again, it moved with me. Not an echo. Not a delayed reaction. Perfectly synchronized. My hands clenched into fists. Who's there? No response. Just the slow shift of the air. The feeling of being watched. The radio crackled. A whisper low, almost gentle. Keep going. I turned back toward the trail. Ahead of me, something had changed. A shape. Distant, but visible. A cabin. Old. Abandoned. Tucked between the trees, as if it had always been there, hidden just beyond the edge of perception. The door was slightly ajar, the interior swallowed in shadow. I swallowed hard. I had a choice. Stay in the woods, where something was following me, or step into the cabin, where something was waiting. The wind picked up, whispering through the trees, carrying something soft beneath it. Laughter, not mine, not human. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the cabin. The cabin loomed ahead, its dark silhouette barely visible against the dense forest. The wooden planks were warped and aged, the roof sagging slightly, the edges of the doorframe eaten away by time. I forced my breath to steady, my boots pressing into the dirt with slow, deliberate steps. The air around me felt heavier the closer I got. Not cold, not warm, just wrong. Something about this place shouldn't exist, but it did. The wind picked up slightly, whispering through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic blood. I reached the porch, my boots creaking against the wood. The door was already ajar, tilted at an unnatural angle, like it had been waiting for me. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to turn back, but the path behind me had disappeared. There was no going back. I pushed the door open. The inside was dusty, untouched, frozen in time. A small wooden table sat near the center of the single-room cabin, covered in a thin layer of grime. An old iron stove rested against the far wall, its surface rusted. The scent of rot clung to the air, though there were no signs of anything dead. The walls were covered in scratches, deep, jagged marks, carved into the wood like someone had taken a knife or their fingernails to them. Some were old, faded with time. Others were fresh. I stepped further inside. The floor groaned beneath my weight. Then a chair moved. Not violently, not abruptly, just a slow, dragging sound as the wooden legs scraped against the floor. I froze. The chair had been still when I entered. Now it was slightly turned, like someone had been sitting in it, watching me. My fingers hovered over the radio, but I didn't press the button. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what would come through. I exhaled slowly, forcing my legs to move. The scratches on the walls continued across the ceiling, long and jagged, like something had crawled up there, clinging to the wooden beams. Then I saw it, something new, something that didn't belong. A notebook, resting on the table. I approached carefully, my fingers hovering over the cover before I finally picked it up. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed with age, and the first thing I saw my own handwriting. My pulse stopped. I flipped through the pages, the ink smudged in some places, too rushed in others. But the words were mine. The dates, the log, entries they were my own reports. Only I had never written them. I turned to the final page, my hands shaking. Just a single line. It's almost time. A deep, suffocating dread pressed against my chest. I wasn't the first person here, and I wouldn't be the last. The air shifted. Behind me, a whisper. "Welcome back." I turned sharply, my pulse hammering. The cabin was empty, but the door was closed. I hadn't shut it. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. This wasn't right. The trail had led me here. The voices had led me here. I flipped through the notebook again, scanning the entries. Some pages were torn, others faded beyond recognition, but one thing stood out. Every entry ended the same way, with a warning. If you see it, don't run. If you hear it, don't speak. If you feel it, don't move. I ran my hand over the words, my breath coming faster now. The message wasn't just written once. It was etched into the pages, over and over again, like the writer had been desperate to remember. A cold, creeping sensation spread up my spine. Something was watching me. I turned, scanning the cabin. The dust on the floor was undisturbed. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been here. And yet, I wasn't alone. I pressed my hand against the wooden table, grounding myself. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker, pressing against my skin. I had to get out, but there was no way out. The windows were shut tight, warped from age. The walls solid, unbroken. Only the door that had closed on its own. I took a step toward it, my boots barely making a sound. My fingers reached for the knob click. The lock turned on its own. I inhaled sharply, stepping back. Something moved in the shadows. Not a figure, no, a shape, just a presence, pressing against the edges of the room, watching, waiting. I reached for my radio, my breath uneven. "Dispatch, do you copy?" Static. Then my own voice. "You were here before." I gritted my teeth. "Where am I?" Silence. Then The static shifted, like something was moving inside of it. A slow inhale, a slow exhale. Breathing, listening. I turned back toward the notebook, flipping through the pages. Somewhere in here, a star. I see somewhere, in my own words, asterisk. And then, near the middle of the journal, a passage caught my eye. It won't let you leave unless you do what it asks, but you won't know what it wants. Not at first, not until it's too late. A cold sweat broke over my skin. I heard the voice again, closer this time. It's almost time. The air dropped. My breath came out in a fog. I turned toward the door. The lock clicked open, a slow creak as the wood shifted inward. Beyond it, the trail. Only now, something stood in the middle of it, tall, still, waiting. Me. I exhaled sharply. I had two choices. Stay in the cabin, or step back onto the trail toward the thing wearing my face. And I already knew there was only one real option. I walked forward. The door shut behind me, and the thing on the path smiled. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing the cabin away as if it had never existed. The moment it closed, the weight of the air changed lighter, but only just. The thick, suffocating stillness remained, stretching through the trees, clinging to my skin like damp fog. I was back on the trail, and the thing wearing my face was still standing there. It hadn't moved, not a single inch. Its arms hung at its sides, its body unnaturally stiff, but it was watching. I could feel it. I took a slow, careful step forward. The ground beneath my boots felt off too firm, too smooth, like stepping on something prepared for me. I kept my breathing steady, forcing myself to look at it. It was still me, same uniform, same stance, but its eyes were different now. They weren't just hollow. They were expectant, waiting for something. I opened my mouth to speak, but the moment I did, the radio at my side crackled, cutting me off. I didn't touch it, didn't press the button, and yet a voice. My voice. Don't ask it anything. A cold shudder ran through me. I exhaled sharply, pressing my lips together, swallowing the words that had been forming. The thing on the trail tilted its head, like it had noticed. I didn't move, didn't blink, and then it stepped forward, just once. The motion was smooth, effortless, not human. But it stopped, waiting again. I forced my fingers to unclench, gripping the edge of my vest to keep them still. The rule had been given to me. Don't ask it anything. I didn't know who had warned me, but I had a feeling I needed to listen. I took another step forward, mirroring it. Its face didn't change. No anger, no reaction. It just watched. The trail stretched past it, winding into the trees, deeper into the forest. I had no idea where it led, but I knew I needed to get there. Whatever had trapped me here, whatever had been shifting the path, taking my voice, leaving pieces of me along the way, it wanted me to keep moving. And the thing standing in my way, it wasn't here to stop me. It was here to see if I understood the rules. I took another step. It stepped again. We were closing the distance now. Slow, deliberate. If I hesitated, if I showed any sign of confusion, of doubt, I had the sinking feeling it would take more than just a step. The radio crackled again. Static. Then, keep going. I did. And then we were face to face. The thing standing in front of me was identical. I could see every detail, every stitch in the uniform, every faint scar on my skin. But up close, I could tell. It wasn't me. Not fully. The texture of the skin was wrong, like it had been molded, shaped, but never fully finished. The way the shadows moved across its face, they weren't natural. It didn't breathe. I took a slow inhale through my nose, keeping my posture even, and then I stepped past it. It didn't move. It didn't stop me. It just watched, as if I had passed a test. I kept walking, my muscles locked, every instinct screaming at me to turn back and see if it was following. But I didn't. Not until I was far enough away. When I finally turned, it was gone. The trail behind me stretched empty, like it had never been there at all. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding left my chest. I pressed my hand over my radio, grounding myself. I was still here, still trapped, but I was moving forward. And now, I was starting to understand. The rules weren't just rules, they were warnings. And if I wanted to get out of here, I had to follow them, because whatever was waiting at the end of this trail, it was watching me, too. The silence of the forest stretched endlessly around me as I walked forward, my boots pressing into the packed dirt of the trail. The air was dense, heavy in a way that made each breath feel weighted, like the atmosphere itself was pressing down on me. I glanced at my watch. Still 3:17 p.m. The broken watch I had found earlier had been stuck at the same time, and if my own watch was also frozen, that meant time wasn't moving here. Or maybe it was, just not in a way I understood. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat and forced my feet forward. The trail had no debris, no fallen branches or uneven patches of earth. It was too clean, too precise, like it had been made for me. The trees closed in tighter on either side, their bark darker now, almost black. The branches above twisted together, forming a canopy so dense that barely any light filtered through. The farther I walked, the more unnatural everything felt. I wasn't supposed to be here, not just in the sense of getting lost in the wilderness. This place wasn't supposed to exist. I took a deep breath, forcing my pulse to steady. I needed to focus. I needed to find an exit if one even existed. The wind stirred slightly, carrying a sound through the trees. A creaking noise, like the groan of something old, something shifting. I stopped, tilting my head to listen. It came again closer this time. A long, slow creak, like wood bending under pressure. I turned slowly, my muscles locking up. There, just off the path, nestled between two thick tree trunks, a wooden sign. I frowned. There had been no markers before. The closer I got, the clearer the letters became, carved deeply into the wood. Keep going. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. The sign was old, the wood cracked, splintering at the edges. But the carving was fresh. Someone had made this recently. I swallowed hard and turned back to the trail. Who had put this here? And, more importantly, were they still here? The wind picked up again, stronger this time. The leaves above rattled, shifting against each other like whispered voices. Something wasn't right. I took another step forward, and my radio clicked on. I froze. I hadn't touched it. The static hummed through the speaker, faint but alive. Then a voice, not mine, not distorted, not distant, just wrong. Almost there. The words sent a slow, creeping dread through my chest. Who was talking to me? Or worse, what was talking to me? I hesitated before pressing the call button. Who is this? Silence. Then, a sound. Footsteps, not mine, coming from the trees, moving closer. The breath caught in my throat. I took a step back. The footsteps stopped. I turned sharply, scanning the trees. The darkness between the trunks felt deeper now, stretching into places my flashlight couldn't reach. Then, from the radio, a soft, familiar noise. A laugh. Low. Too familiar. It was my laugh. My body locked. I hadn't laughed. I hadn't made a single sound. And yet the forest had copied me. I pressed the call button again, my voice tight. Who's out there? The radio crackled then, a single knock, right behind me. I spun. Nothing. The trees stood still, silent, as if they had never moved at all. But I knew what I had heard. And worse, I knew what had made the sound. Something was here. Something that could mimic me. Take my voice. Take my laugh. Take my place. I turned back to the trail, forcing myself to move. And then, just ahead, a shape. Small, placed perfectly in the dirt. A photo. I approached cautiously, my pulse slamming against my ribs. I bent down, reaching for it with stiff fingers. The moment I turned it over, the world stopped. The breath in my lungs turned to ice. The photo was of me, standing right here, on this trail, right now. I dropped it. A deep, slow horror unfurled inside my chest. Something had taken this picture moments ago. I turned sharply, my breath coming fast and uneven. There was nothing, just the trees, the trail, the silence. I had to get out, now. I shoved the photo into my pocket, moving faster now, my boots scuffing against the dirt as I pushed forward. The trees shifted again, not visibly, just in the way they felt. I wasn't alone anymore, and I had a sinking feeling that I never had been. The radio clicked again, and this time I didn't press the button, because I knew it would answer anyway. A voice, low and familiar. Mine. Don't look behind you. I didn't. I just kept walking. And behind me, something breathed. I walked. I didn't turn around. The voice from the radio had been mine, but the warning wasn't. Don't look behind you. So I didn't. Each step forward felt heavier, like the weight of the air itself was pushing me down. My boots pressed into the packed dirt of the trail, but I couldn't hear my own footsteps. The only sound was breathing, not mine. Something else. Behind me, I clenched my hands into fists, forcing my arms to stay at my sides. I could feel it, the presence growing closer, watching, waiting. The trail stretched endlessly ahead of me, disappearing into the trees. The path was the only thing that felt real, the only thing I could trust. If I stopped, if I turned, I had the gut-wrenching certainty that I wouldn't see myself anymore. I would see it, and then I would never leave. I pressed my lips together, focusing on my breathing. Even, controlled. I had to keep moving. The radio crackled again. A single, quiet whisper. Faster. I didn't hesitate. I picked up my pace. The whisper hadn't been a threat. It had been a warning. Whatever was behind me, it was getting closer. The trail curved ahead, winding between the trees. The air around me grew heavier, denser. Each step forward felt like walking through water. like the forest itself was trying to hold me back. The breathing behind me changed. It was louder now, closer, shallow, and wrong, like something that had never needed to breathe before was learning how. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move faster. And then up ahead, in the middle of the path, a mirror, standing upright. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just any mirror. It was an exact replica of the one in my cabin back at the station, the one I saw every morning, the one that had always reflected me. But this time, I wasn't sure if it would. I slowed. The mirror was tall, its frame old and wooden, carved with patterns that didn't make sense. My own reflection stared back at me. For now, I took a slow breath and stepped closer. The air around the mirror rippled like heat rising from asphalt. My reflection moved with me, exactly with me. No lag, no hesitation. I reached out. So did it. I hesitated, my fingertips inches from the glass. The reflection's face was my own butt. I felt the wrongness before I saw it. My reflection's eyes weren't blinking. My pulse spiked. Had blinked, it didn't. A sharp breath caught in my throat. I jerked my hand back. The moment I moved away, the reflection smiled. Not my smile. Not a human smile. Something else. And then the breathing behind me stopped. My skin crawled. The air turned ice cold. Something was right behind me now. Watching. Waiting. My reflection's head tilted, its mouth stretching too wide. Then it raised a hand. But I hadn't moved. It was acting on its own. A whisper slid through the air, curling against my ear. Turn around. I couldn't. I wouldn't. But my reflection did. It turned to face whatever was behind me. My stomach twisted. The reflection's eyes widened. Its expression flickered into something I'd never seen on my own face before. Terror. Then it screamed. The mirror shattered. Glass exploded outward, slicing the air, the ground, my skin. I threw my arms up, stumbling backward as shards rained down. The moment the mirror broke, the weight in the air lifted. The breathing stopped. I gasped, my lungs burning. My hands trembled as I lowered them. The trail ahead was clear. The forest was still. The mirror was gone. Not broken, not shattered, just gone, like it had never been there at all. My chest rose and fell in uneven bursts. My arms stung where the glass had cut me, but the pain barely registered. I wasn't alone in this place, and whatever was here, it wanted me to see it. I wiped my hands against my pants, ignoring the tremble in my fingers, and then, slowly, I kept walking. The trail stretched endlessly ahead, winding through the dense trees. The deeper I went, the less natural everything felt. The ground was too even. The trees were too perfectly spaced. The path was leading me somewhere, but where? I pressed my fingers against my radio, debating whether I should call in again. The last time, I had heard my own voice. Would that happen again? Or would I finally get an answer? I pressed the button. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. Do you copy? Silence. Then, static. Long, dragging static, stretching too far, like something was breathing inside it. Then, a voice. Not mine. Not distorted. Not broken. Just calm. Keep going. The air shifted. A presence unfolded around me. I wasn't alone. I gritted my teeth and kept walking. And then I saw it. The end of the trail. Up ahead, where the path finally stopped a clearing. At the center of it, a fire, burning bright, burning alone, waiting for me. The fire burned without sound, no crackling of wood, no shifting ember, just flames rising in perfect stillness. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, my breath uneven. The air was warm here, radiating off the fire in waves, but it didn't feel natural. This was different. Everything leading to this point, the disappearing paths, the voices, the thing that wore my face, it had all been leading me here. To the fire, to the end of the trail. I swallowed hard, my fingers brushing against the radio at my side. Should I call it in? Try to reach dispatch again. But even if I did, who would answer? Would it be me? Again, would it tell me to keep going? Or would it finally tell me the truth? I exhaled slowly, scanning the clearing. The ground was different here. Not dirt, not ash. Something else, something smoother. I knelt down, running my fingers across the surface. Stone. The entire clearing was carved from a massive, smooth slab of rock, untouched by time, untouched by the forest. No cracks, nowhere. Like it had been placed here, like it had been waiting. I stood slowly, my pulse steady but heavy. The fire flickered, shifting just slightly, and I took my first step forward. The moment my boot touched the stone, the voices began. Not loud, not clear, just whispers, rising from the fire, curling through the air like smoke, calling, inviting. I clenched my jaw and took another step forward. The whispers grew, not one voice, many, layered, stretched, and then I heard my own. It's almost time. I stopped. The heat of the fire pressed against my skin, too warm now. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't supposed to be here, but I had always been here. I knew that now. The trail had never led anywhere else. There had never been an escape. This had always been the end. I forced myself to move closer. The flames flickered, stretching toward me, reaching. The whispers sharpened. Then the fire shifted, and for the first time, I saw what was inside. My stomach twisted violently. The fire wasn't burning wood. It was burning something else. Something alive. Something waiting. Something that looked exactly like me. And then it opened its eyes. The fire moved, not like flames shifting in the wind. It moved like something alive. The shape inside the fire asterisk, the thing that looked like me asterisk, opened its eyes. The air in the clearing collapsed inward, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. My muscles locked. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, to do anything. But my body wouldn't obey. The thing inside the fire didn't struggle, didn't thrash. It just watched me, waiting. The flames rose around it, licking at its skin asterisk, my skin asterisk, but it didn't burn. The fire didn't consume it. The fire was holding it, containing it, like it wasn't supposed to leave. I forced my breath to steady, swallowing hard against the rising nausea in my gut. The whispers hadn't stopped. They curled through the heat, layered over each other, overlapping, pressing into my ears. Almost time. Keep going. You were here before. My own voice. Over and over again. I clenched my hands into fists, my nails biting into my palms. Think. I had made it this far. I had followed the path, followed the rules, but was that the mistake? Had I been walking deeper into the trap the entire time? I took a slow step back. The fire flared. The thing inside it moved. Not much, just a shift, a twitch. But now it was smiling. I felt ice crawl through my veins. The ground beneath me wasn't stone anymore. I looked down. Ash, thick, blackened ash covered the clearing now, stretching outward, rising in slow, drifting waves. I pressed my boot into it, and it sank slightly like something was underneath. Something moving. I stepped back again, my pulse hammering. My radio clicked on. I didn't touch it. Static poured through the speaker, thick and warping, shifting like something was breathing inside it. Then a voice. Not mine, this time. Something else. Something older. Come closer. The fire flickered violently, almost reaching toward me. The thing inside tilted its head, like it was listening too, like it was waiting for my decision. My stomach twisted, my legs locked in place. I had come all this way. There was no way back. The only way was forward. But forward meant walking toward the fire, toward it. The heat pressed harder against my skin, my breath coming in slow, shuddering gasps. The whispers shifted. They weren't random anymore. They were giving me a choice. Stay, burn. A cold sweat broke across my forehead. This was it, the end of the trail. The real question was, who was waiting for me? And more importantly, who had been here before? I exhaled slowly, forcing my legs to move. One step forward, then another. The fire grew hotter. The flames stretched higher. The thing inside the fire, the thing that wore my face, smiled wider. And then, very slowly, it raised a hand, a mirror image of my own, an invitation, or a warning. I didn't know which, but I knew if I took one more step, I wouldn't be leaving this place the same. If I left at all. The fire roared before me, yet it made no sound. No crackling wood, no shifting embers. It burned in perfect, unnatural silence, as if it had existed long before I arrived, and would continue long after I was gone, if I was ever going to leave. The thing inside the fire, the thing that looked exactly like me, was waiting. Its expression never changed, but the longer I stared, the more I understood. This wasn't a simple copy. It wasn't a shadow, a reflection, or an echo of myself. It was something else entirely. Something that had been here before me. Something that had been waiting. I took a slow, measured breath and tried to think through my options. But the truth was, I didn't have any. The trail had led me here. Every path, every turn, every vanishing footprint, everything had brought me to this moment. I exhaled sharply, trying to slow my pulse. The ash beneath my boots shifted slightly, as if something was moving beneath the surface. My stomach turned. I looked down, watching the way the thick, blackened dust breathed. Like the ground itself was alive. I stepped back instinctively, and the thing in the fire moved with me. Not a step, not a shift, just a reaction, a perfect, deliberate reaction. It was waiting to see what I would do. I reached for my radio, my fingers trembling. I didn't even know what I expected. A response. A voice? Would it be mine again? Would it be something else? I pressed the button. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. I am at the end of the trail. There is a static. The same static as before. But this time, It was different. There was something else inside it. A whisper. My voice. You made it. I clenched my jaw. The thing in the fire smiled wider. And then, for the first time, it spoke. Not in the radio. Not in my head. Out loud. Come closer. The words were my own. But the tone, the rhythm, they weren't mine. I stood frozen, my breath locked in my throat. I had been careful. I had followed the rules. I hadn't spoken to the things in the woods. I hadn't asked the wrong questions. And now it was talking to me. I took another step back. The flames burned higher. And then the thing inside the fire stood up. The ground lurched. The trees at the edge of the clearing bent inward, as if pulled by some invisible force. The air around me thickened, pressing against my chest, against my skin. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The thing inside the fire, the thing wearing my face, stepped forward. Not out of the fire. Not yet, but closer to the edge. The fire didn't consume it. The flames moved around it, like they were part of it, not a danger to it. I swallowed hard, forcing my muscles to unlock. It was watching me, waiting for me to decide. I pressed the radio again, my voice tight. What do you want? A long, slow pause. Then, from the fire, I want to go home. The words sent a sharp chill down my spine. Home. It wasn't asking. It was telling. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. You can't leave. The thing tilted its head. Then it laughed. Not a full laugh. Not a chuckle. Just a soft, low exhale, like it knew something I didn't. I took another step back. The ash beneath me shifted again. The whispers grew louder. The voice on the radio, the one that had always been mine, spoke again. Keep going. The weight of those words settled deep in my bones. I had come this far. I had reached the end. And now, the final choice had been given to me. I looked at the fire, at the thing inside, at myself. It had been trapped here, maybe for a long time, maybe forever. It had waited for me, and now it wanted to take my place. The air shifted again, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to decide. I had two choices: stay or run. The thing inside the fire raised its hand toward me, an invitation, or a demand. I clenched my teeth, my mind racing. Then I made my choice. I ran. I turned and bolted toward the trees, my boots slamming against the ashen ground. The air around me roared, the fire behind me flaring higher, casting long, flickering shadows through the clearing. The thing inside the fire, it didn't chase me. It didn't have to, because the moment I stepped off the stone, the trail changed. The trees weren't the same anymore. The path I had taken to get here gone. And now I wasn't sure if I had ever been walking on a real path at all. The whispers didn't stop. The fire didn't fade. I wasn't free. I was just running towards something else. Something waiting further ahead. And deep inside me, a terrible thought took root. A thought I couldn't shake. A thought I didn't want to believe. What if I had made the wrong choice? I ran. Not blindly, not without thought, but with a single, desperate purpose: to get away. But even as my boots slammed against the earth, kicking up dust and ash, Even as my breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, I knew the truth. I wasn't running away. I was running deeper. The trees changed around me, not shifting in the way they had before, not warping or twisting, but becoming something else. Darker, taller, too perfect. Each one identical, their bark the same jagged texture, their trunks spaced evenly apart, as if the forest had been planned, designed. And worst of all, the trail was still leading me forward. I hadn't left it behind, hadn't escaped it. No matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I tried to flee, the trail still existed beneath me. It wanted me to keep going. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to slow down. Panicking wasn't helping me. I had already learned that this place didn't work the way the real world did. The rules here were different. I had followed them. I had broken them. And yet, the trail was still guiding me forward. Was that good? Or was I simply walking towards something worse? I exhaled, trying to steady my nerves. My legs burned from running, my arms ached, but I forced myself to focus. I checked my watch. 3:17 p.m. Still. Always. A sick feeling curled in my stomach. Was I stuck in this time? Or was this place outside of time entirely? I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the fire still flickering in the distance. But there was nothing, just trees. Thick, unbroken trees stretching endlessly behind me. Had the fire ever even been there? Or had it only existed for as long as I had seen it? I swallowed hard, my hands tightening into fists. I had to keep moving. The trail wanted me to. So I followed. For how long? I didn't know. The path never changed, never broke, never split. It was perfect. It had always been perfect. And then I saw something up ahead. A structure. Not a fire this time. Not another clearing. Something man-made. Something wrong. The trees thinned slightly, revealing a tower, tall, rusted. It loomed in the distance, half hidden by the mist creeping through the trees. It shouldn't be here. It couldn't be here. Because I knew this tower. I had seen it before, on the park's old blueprints. The decommissioned fire tower, the one that had been torn down years ago, the one that didn't exist anymore. And yet, it was waiting for me. The fire tower shouldn't exist. And yet, there it was, standing tall in the distance, rusted and skeletal against the grey sky. I slowed my steps, my breath coming sharp and uneven. The last time I had seen this tower was in the old records at the ranger station faded blueprints, archived photos. But in the real world, in the world I knew, it had been torn down years ago. And yet, it was here. The trail led straight to it, like it had always been leading to this moment. I swallowed, my fingers brushing against the radio at my vest. I could try to call in again. But what was the point? I knew what would happen. I knew what would answer. Still, I pressed the button. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. I have reached an unknown fire tower, requesting confirmation of coordinates. Silence. Then, static. A slow inhale. A slow exhale. The breathing was closer this time. And then a new voice. Not mine. Not an echo. Something else. Come up. I gritted my teeth, my pulse spiking. No, I wasn't going up there. I had followed this trail far enough. I had played this game long enough. I turned sharply, stepping off the path, ready to force my way through the trees. But there was no way to go. The trees weren't just dense. They were solid. The wall. No gaps. No spaces. No way through. I took a shaky step back. The air was wrong here. Heavy. Pressing. The only way out was up. I turned back toward the fire tower, my stomach twisting. It was tall. Rusted stairs spiraled toward the top, leading to the cabin that loomed above everything. A cold wind picked up, rattling the metal beams, and yet the tower felt full, like something was already up there, watching me, waiting for me. I took a slow breath, and then I stepped onto the first stair. The moment my boot touched the metal, the air shifted. The forest behind me disappeared, not visibly, not all at once, but I felt it, like stepping through a door and realizing you can't go back. I forced myself to move, gripping the rusted railing as I climbed. The metal groaned beneath my weight, each step unsteady. The wind howled, not around the tower, through it, like the structure itself was breathing. I swallowed against the tightness in my chest, focusing on the stairs, one at a time. Keep going. I was halfway up when the radio crackled again. I didn't reach for it. I didn't touch it, because I already knew it was going to answer anyway. A whisper, soft and curling through the static. Almost there. I exhaled slowly, gripping the railing tighter. I knew. I felt it, the weight above me, the presence. I reached the last platform, standing just outside the cabin door. It was open. A thin crack of darkness stretched beyond the threshold, like a mouth slightly parted. I clenched my jaw. The wind was gone. The breathing had stopped. The world around me was silent. I took the final step forward and crossed inside. The figure in the corner didn't move. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. It just stood there, watching. I clenched my jaw, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. The fire tower was silent, the air thick and unmoving. I had reached the end of the trail. I had climbed to the highest point, and yet I wasn't done. The thing that wore my face was still waiting. I exhaled slowly, forcing my fingers to unclench. My muscles burned from the climb, but I kept my stance steady. This was different from before. This wasn't like the thing in the clearing. This wasn't like the reflection that didn't blink. This was something else, something more final. The whispers started again, soft at first, curling through the room like smoke. Almost time. Keep going. You were here before. I stiffened. The voices weren't coming from the radio. They were coming from the walls, from the floor beneath me, from the thing standing in the corner. I took a step back. The floor groaned under my weight, the old wood shifting like it was breathing beneath me. The figure in the corner tilted its head. Then it moved. Not a step, not a lunge, just a shift. The kind of movement you don't realize is happening until it's too late. Like something had rewritten the space between us. 1 second, it was across the room. Now, it was closer. I froze. The radio at my hip crackled to life. My voice. If you see it, don't run. If you hear it, don't speak. If you feel it, don't move. I inhaled sharply, my chest locking. The rules. The same warning I had read in the journal. The same words I had written myself. The thing in the corner was testing me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I clenched my fists, keeping my stance steady. Don't move. Don't speak. The thing shifted again. It was so close now. If I reached out, I could touch it. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. The air tightened. The fire tower groaned. Then the thing spoke. Let me in. My breath caught in my throat. Its voice was my voice, but not an exact copy. It was older, weaker, like it had been trapped here for a long time. The lights overhead flickered. The air thinned. I felt something inside me unraveling, like the moment before waking up from a dream, that split second where you remember something you shouldn't. Something that was erased. Memories that were never supposed to come back. I had been here before, hadn't I? I wasn't sure anymore. The figure in front of me wasn't waiting for my answer. It already knew what I was going to say, because it had already said it before. A sharp pressure built behind my eyes, pushing against my skull. My knees felt weak, my vision blurred at the edges. I was losing myself, losing my place in reality. I had to do something. I forced a breath through my teeth and took a risk. I stepped forward, toward it. The figure didn't react. Not at first. Then its face changed. Not the expression, the shape. The edges blurred, stretched, shifting between different versions of myself. Younger, older. Versions of me I remembered. Versions of me I had never been. Each flicker of its face sent a fresh pulse of nausea through me. I wasn't supposed to be seeing this. I wasn't supposed to be here. Then it stopped. The flickering ended, and the face staring back at me was no longer mine. It was something else entirely. Something wearing my skin like a mask. My pulse spiked, my muscles locked. It wasn't me. It had never been me, and now it had run out of patience. The whisper returned, curling around the air, filling the room. Almost time. The lights exploded. I woke up on the trail, gasping. My hands were covered in ash. The sky above me was black. Not nighttime. Not storm clouds. Just black. Like the entire world beyond the trail had been erased. I forced myself to sit up, my head pounding. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of burned wood and earth coating my tongue. I turned, looking around. I was alone. The fire tower was gone. The radio at my side was silent. Had I escaped? Had I finally left that place? I exhaled sharply, pressing my palm against the dirt to ground myself. The trail was still here, still waiting, and up ahead, a light, not fire, not a lantern, something else, something glowing deep in the trees. A slow, creeping dread curled through my stomach. I had reached the end of the trail, hadn't I? Then why was I still walking? I pushed myself to my feet, my breath shaky. I didn't know what I was walking toward. I didn't know if I was even myself anymore, but the trail wasn't over yet, and something was waiting for me ahead. The light ahead pulsed softly, flickering between the trees like a beacon. It wasn't warm. It wasn't comforting. It felt wrong, and yet I walked toward it, my boots pressed into the dirt, the trail stretching endlessly forward, guiding me to something I didn't understand. The sky remained black. No stars, no moon, no clouds, just emptiness. Like I had stepped outside the world entirely. The radio at my hip remained silent. The fire tower was gone. Had I escaped? Had I left that place? Or was I simply walking into another trap? The light ahead grew closer, illuminating the trees. The ground beneath me was too smooth, too perfect, like a road that had been waiting for me, like a road that had been traveled before. I swallowed hard, forcing my breath to stay even. My muscles were tight, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn back. But there was no back, only forward. The light was close now, spilling through the trunks, casting long, stretching shadows across the forest floor. And then I saw it. A building, not a cabin, not a tower. Something worse. The ranger station. My ranger station. I stopped cold, my pulse hammering. It was exactly the same. The same structure, the same windows, the same porch with the loose step I had meant to fix weeks ago. But I had left this place. I had followed the trail away from it. So how had I returned? Had I ever left at all? A deep, sinking horror settled into my chest. I forced myself to move, approaching the porch slowly. The door was open. A single beam of light spilled from inside, stretching out onto the dirt like a path, inviting me in, or warning me away. I swallowed hard and reached for my radio. I pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. I have arrived at..." I stopped. What was I supposed to say? I had arrived at where? I didn't even know if this was real, or if I was even myself anymore. The static crackled through the radio. Then a voice, familiar, mine, "Come inside." The words hit something deep inside me. This wasn't the first time I had heard them. Had I followed them before? Had I been inside already? The memory was there, just beneath the surface, but I couldn't reach it. I gritted my teeth, stepping onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath my weight. Inside the station, the lights flickered. Something was waiting for me. I had a choice. Stay outside, or step inside and face what was there. I already knew. There was only one real choice. I walked inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The door slammed shut behind me, the echo stretching through the ranger station like a warning. I wasn't alone. I knew that now. The lights overhead flickered weakly, their glow barely illuminating the space in front of me. The air was thick, unmoving, carrying the faint scent of old wood and something else. Something metallic, something like blood. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move. The room looked exactly as I had left it before. The desk was still there, papers scattered across its surface. The radio console sat in its usual place, silent, waiting. The chair, it was turned slightly, like someone had just been sitting in it, watching the door, waiting for me to return. A deep, twisting feeling of unease settled in my stomach. I had been here before, hadn't I? I stepped forward, the old wooden floor groaning beneath my weight. My fingers brushed over the edge of the desk, leaving streaks in the thin layer of dust. Then something shifted. Not a sound, not a movement, just a presence. Something had changed in the room. The air felt heavier, like I was being watched. The radio crackled to life. I flinched, my pulse spiking. My hand flew to the call button, but I didn't press it, because I already knew it was going to speak anyway. A whisper curled through the static. "Look at the desk." The words were soft, distorted my voice. I exhaled sharply, my hands clenching at my sides. I didn't want to look, but I did. Slowly, carefully, I turned my gaze to the desk, and there, sitting in the center, like it had been waiting for me to find it, was a journal. A new one. The cover was cracked, the pages slightly curled at the edges, but the ink was fresh. I hesitated before picking it up. My fingers trembled slightly as I flipped it open, scanning the first page. My own handwriting. I came back. A shudder ran through me. The words were mine. But I had never written them. I flipped further. The ink smudged in some places, rushed in others. The handwriting grew more frantic with each page. I thought I left, but the trail doesn't end. It never ends. I don't know how many times I've done this. Something else is here. It knows me. It knows what I'm going to do before I do it. I think it's been watching me for a long time. The pages stuck together slightly as I turned them. Some had scratches across the ink, as if I had tried to erase my own words. I flipped to the final entry. A single line. Check the mirror. A deep, suffocating dread settled in my chest. I knew what that meant. I had seen it before. I had seen myself before. The mirror in the corner of the station was waiting. The same one I had looked into 1,000 times before. The same one that had always reflected me. But now, I wasn't sure if it would. I wasn't sure if it ever had. I inhaled slowly, forcing my feet to move. Each step toward the mirror felt heavier, like I was walking towards something irreversible. The reflection stared back at me. At first it looked normal. My uniform, my tired eyes, my dirt-streaked skin. Then it blinked, a second too late. The breath caught in my throat. I hadn't blinked, but it had. A slow, awful realization settled in my chest. This wasn't my reflection. It never had been. It had been watching me from the other side. The radio crackled again, a whisper curling through the static. Switch places. The lights flickered. The air collapsed inward, and the reflection smiled. The reflection smiled, not with my expression, not with my emotions, with something else entirely. It wasn't me. It had never been me. And now it was waiting. The radio at my hip crackled, but I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew what it would say. Switch places. I stepped back, my breath uneven. The mirror remained the same, my reflection still staring at me, still wearing that awful, unnatural grin. Then it moved, not like a normal reflection. Not as a copy of me. Independently, it lifted its hand. It pressed against the glass. A silent invitation, or a demand. The walls of the ranger station creaked. The air grew thicker, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. I swallowed hard, forcing my mind to work through the panic. I had seen this before. The warnings in the notebook. The voices on the radio. The trail had led me here, and I had followed it without question. Was that the mistake? Had I never really left? A thought wormed into my mind, slow and suffocating. What if this wasn't the first time I had made it to this moment? What if I had been standing here before, faced with this same choice? I forced my feet to stay planted, resisting the pull of the mirror. Something about this, it felt too familiar, like I had already failed before. The radio crackled again. This time, the voice was softer, more desperate. Please. My pulse spiked. The thing in the mirror was watching me closely now, waiting for me to react. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay still. It wanted me to move first. That was the game, wasn't it? That had always been the game. I inhaled slowly, my fingers curling into fists. The reflection's smile faltered. Then it stepped forward. I stumbled back. The mirror didn't shatter. It didn't break. It bent, like the glass itself was shifting, stretching, like it was trying to let something through. The radio let out a burst of static louder this time, angrier. Let me out. The lights in the station flickered violently. The walls groaned. The reflection was still pushing forward, its body distorting against the surface of the mirror, its face stretching unnaturally. I had to do something. I reached for the notebook on the desk, flipping through the pages with shaking hand. There had to be a way to stop this. Something I had written, something I had forgotten. The pages blurred together, my eyes skipping over them, struggling to focus until I found it. Scrawled in the margins, repeated over and over again. Don't acknowledge it. Don't let it know you see it. Don't answer it. I froze. I had already broken the rule. I had answered it. The whisper, the voice. I had spoken back, and now it was trying to switch places. The mirror groaned, the glass bulging outward. I had seconds before it forced its way through. I slammed the notebook shut. I had one chance, one rule left to follow. I had to stop seeing it. I shut my eyes. The moment I did, the room collapsed inward. A violent gust of wind tore through the station, shaking the walls, rattling the floor beneath me. The pressure built in my ears, pressing into my skull, like something was trying to force its way into my mind. I clenched my jaw, refusing to look, refusing to see it. The wind howled. The floorboards shook beneath me. The radio screamed, and then silence. I gasped, my lungs burning. The pressure was gone. The air settled. The station was still. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. The mirror was still there. The reflection was not. The surface of the glass was empty. It wasn't showing the room anymore. It was showing something else. Somewhere else. A place I didn't recognize. A place I wasn't supposed to see. And then a hand pressed against the glass. From the other side, I stepped back, my breath uneven. The handprint remained. The radio crackled softly. Almost time. I turned away from the mirror, grabbing the notebook, flipping to the last page. There was a new entry now, one I hadn't written. A single line. You got away this time. I swallowed hard, flipping the page. The next entry was already waiting. That you won't next time. A slow, cold dread spread through my chest. I closed the notebook, gripping it tightly. I wasn't free. I wasn't done. The trail wasn't over. It had just changed. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. And then, without another word, I walked out of the station, back onto the trail, back into the unknown. The door to the ranger station swung shut behind me. The forest was waiting. The air outside was different now, heavier. The pressure settled against my chest, making each breath feel like I was inhaling something thicker than air. I had done something, changed something. And now, the trail had changed too. The trees stretched higher than before, their trunks twisting unnaturally, their branches tangled together like skeletal hands. The ground beneath my boots was softer, like something beneath the dirt had been disturbed. I swallowed hard, gripping the notebook tightly. I needed to keep moving. I wasn't safe here. I never had been. The radio at my hip was silent, but I could feel the weight of it. It would speak again. It always did. I took my first step forward, following the trail as it stretched ahead of me. The trees pressed closer with each step, the sky above fading into a dull, empty gray. There was no sun, no wind, no sound. Only the trail, only me. I walked for what felt like hours. The path remained unbroken. No footprints, no signs of life. No way to tell if I was actually moving forward. I checked my watch. 3:17 p.m. Still. Always. A slow dread coiled in my stomach. I wasn't moving through time anymore. I was moving through something else. Something that had been waiting for me to return. I kept walking, because what else could I do? The trail wanted me to. It had always wanted me to. And then the first sign of change. A figure up ahead, standing in the middle of the path. I slowed, my pulse hammering. My breath came shallow, my hands clenching at my sides. I already knew what I was about to see. I already knew. It was me, standing perfectly still, waiting, its head tilted slightly as if studying me. And then it smiled. Not the friendly smile. Not a human one, a knowing one, like it had been waiting for me to realize something. The radio clicked on, a whisper curling through the static. "You're almost home." I swallowed hard, forcing my body to stay still. The thing in front of me asterisk, the thing wearing my face asterisk, took a step forward, then another. I held my breath. The rules. Follow the rules. I reached for the notebook, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. There, scrawled over and over again. If you see it, don't run. If you hear it, don't speak. If you feel it, don't move. I locked my legs in place. The thing kept walking toward me. Its footsteps were silent. Its eyes never blinked. Its smile never faded. And then it stopped, inches away. The air between us felt thin, like only a single breath separated us now. The radio crackled. It spoke again. Trade places. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I knew what it meant. It wanted to switch. For me to take its place. For it to become me. The thing wearing my face lifted its hand, palm up, fingers waiting. A silent invitation. Or a demand. I clenched my teeth. I had made the mistake of answering before. I had almost been pulled through the mirror. I wouldn't make the same mistake again. I shut my eyes. I refused to acknowledge it. I stood perfectly still. The moment I did, the pressure in the air changed. The presence in front of me wavered, and then the whisper returned. Soft, right against my ear. You can't run forever. The air collapsed inward. The forest groaned. I forced my eyes open, and the figure was gone. The trail stretched empty ahead of me. The only proof it had ever been there was the deep, sinking feeling in my chest. It would return. It always did. And next time, I might not be able to stop it. I kept walking, because I had to. The trail wasn't done with me yet, and up ahead something else was waiting. The final stop. I saw it through the trees. Another clearing, and at the center, a door, standing alone, waiting for me. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the notebook. This was the last test, the final choice, and I already knew there was no turning back now. I stepped forward, and the door opened. The door stood alone in the clearing. No walls, no structure, just a door frame, weathered and old, its wood warped by time, its edges cracked, and yet it was open. A dark void stretched beyond it, swallowing the light. The air around it pulsed softly, like a living thing, like something waiting to be acknowledged. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, my pulse a slow, steady hammer against my ribs. This was it, the end of the trail, the final choice. But what was waiting on the other side? The notebook in my hands felt heavier now. I flipped it open, skimming through the pages, searching for some kind of answer, some kind of warning. The last entry had changed. Ink, fresh, like it had been written just moments ago. The door is not an exit. I swallowed hard, flipping the page. Another line. But you already knew that. A shudder crawled up my spine. I did know. Somewhere, deep in the part of my mind that refused to fully accept it I had always known. The trail didn't end. It never ended. It only started again. The radio at my hip crackled, a whisper, soft, almost gentle. Step through. I clenched my fists, my breath slow and controlled. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but there was no back, not anymore. On this, only forward. I took a slow step toward the door. The moment my foot touched the ground inside the clearing, the wind stopped. The forest froze. The world held its breath. And then something moved inside the door. A shape, a figure, standing in the darkness just beyond the threshold, waiting for me, for the final step. I couldn't see its face, but I knew what it was. I had seen it before. I had seen it everywhere, in the reflection that didn't blink, in the shadow that followed me through the trees, in the thing inside the fire. It had always been me, or the version of me that never left, the version of me that had been here before. The notebook trembled in my hands. I turned back to the final page. One more entry had appeared. If you go through, you won't come back as yourself. I exhaled sharply, my mind racing. This was the test, the last test. The trail had led me here, over and over again, waiting to see if I would make the same choice. Had I stepped through before? Had I switched places before? And if I had, who was I now? The wind shifted. The doorframe groaned. The figure beyond the door lifted its hand, a mirror of mine. The same silent invitation. The same demand. I clenched my jaw. I had been following this path blindly. But had I ever actually made a choice? Or had I been pushed toward this moment every single time? I took a slow breath. I needed to know. I needed to see. I took another step forward, and then I turned away. I didn't step through. I didn't run. I just stepped off the trail. The world shook. A violent crack of sound tore through the clearing, splitting through my skull, rattling my bones. The trees twisted. The air thinned. And the voice on the radio, it screamed. Not words, just rage. The ground beneath me cracked. The trees warped. The sky tore open, revealing nothing but endless black. And then the door slammed shut. The moment it did, everything stopped. I opened my eyes. The ranger station. I was sitting at my desk. The old logbook sat in front of me, a pen resting beside it. I blinked, my hands stiff against the wooden surface. I was back in the station, back before the call, before the trail, before any of it. I turned my head slowly toward the window. The forest stretched beyond the glass, the trees calm. No fire, no figures, no waiting shadows, just the woods, just silence. I exhaled, pressing my fingers against my temples. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? I reached for my radio, my hand hovering over the call button. I needed to check. I needed to know. I pressed it down. Dispatch, this is Ranger 402. Do you copy? A pause. A long, slow pause. Then, we haven't received any calls tonight. My blood ran cold. I turned back toward the desk. And there, sitting exactly where I had left it, was the notebook. The one I had carried through the trail. The one with all the warnings. I flipped it open, my fingers trembling. The last page had changed. A new entry, written in my own hand. You did something different this time. A slow, creeping dread settled into my chest. I turned to the first page. The ink had faded. The pages had aged. But the words were still there. Warnings, instructions, memories, all written in my handwriting. Over and over. As if I had been here before. As if I had been trying to remember something important. Something I kept forgetting. The radio crackled softly, a whisper, curling through the static. Did you really escape? I went still, because I didn't know the answer. Not yet. Not until the trail called me back again. And deep down, I knew it would. It always did. And next time, I might not remember what I had done differently. I closed my eyes and waited.